Hello and welcome to the only party that the governments of Europe bar the door against, the after party. I am No, you may not spread no white guilt in Europe. And with me is the great Order Them Off the Internet. And to begin the show, I want to say happy Easter, ladies and gentlemen. Appearing on the honors roll call today is the good girl, Luke, Sam, Normal Style Crew, Omar, Paul, Richard, Ryan, Sean, Stylist Council, Spartan Warrior Queen, our very own, and Saint McFreeman, Stephen, Trent, Westward Thoughts. Everybody knows Westward Thoughts. Zippy, Emily, Ryan, Tom, Rujash, Roy Danton, DB Cooper. Even after parachuting out of the back of the planes, still kicking and alive. Sunshine Girl as well. And of course, Quebec. Again, during this period of increasing anti-white censorship from payment processors and social media platforms, your commitment to white well-being and your willingness to act on those convictions demonstrates the noblest qualities of character. I salute every one of you. If you have not seen Jared and my spring incantation, please head over to The Great Order on YouTube and subscribe to his channel if you have not. Jared wrote the incantation, and we both recorded separate pieces. He put it together and with some music, and it is a magnificent piece. Be sure to make yourself a note and check it out after the show. As for the Super Chat crown winner of last week, the crown goes to the great Roy Danton for investing a total of $154.98. Congratulations and thank you, my dear friend. In second place was the great Quebec, investing $100. Congratulations and thank you as well, dear friend. Let's get a round of rowdy emojis going for these two generous champions of white well-being. Thank you both. Super chat on YouTube or tunnel down into the video's description for a familiar alternative. Jared and I evenly share the super chats with our guests here on the After Party. Today we are joined by Jefferson Lee from the YouTube channel Jefferson Lee. Born in 1986 in Queens, New York, Jefferson Lee is a member of the oft-maligned diabolical group known as white males. He is a husband, entrepreneur, athlete, and political commentator, sick of seeing globalism devour his neighborhood and country. Jefferson first appeared on YouTube in August of 2017 to discuss the issues he saw affecting the West. As is often the case, he was force-fed red pills that led him to being an advocate, not just for the West, but for the Western man. Fresh from his peregrination across Europe, having survived the Iron Curtain of anti-white censorship and bestial violence, he has returned to our embattled redoubt. Jared, do lower the periscope and let's tap into Jefferson Lee and the European report.
Well, Jefferson, welcome back to the after party. We first had Jefferson on back on December 1st, 2018, and he's been on It's Late Night Somewhere. He joined us for a freewheeling late night stream, our more radio style format. His friend Josh Neal, our friend Josh Neal, we're all friends, was on that as well. And as someone in the chat said, when Josh was on, the four of us inevitably are going to have to get on the 4 J's of the apocalypse we've apparently been dubbed. So we'll be doing that soon. But it is great to welcome Jefferson back to the after party. We had a fantastic conversation when he was first on back in December, and we've been best buds since then. And yeah, we're really going to use his recent trip to Europe. We're going to explore that and use it as a jumping off point just to explore all the different themes that come up. So just to get right into it, Jefferson, we're curious about what your expectations were, to kind of give us a little prelude before you went over there to Hungary.
Sure. Before I get into any of that, I just want to thank both of you guys for having me back on here. I can't believe it's been almost 5 months since the last time we all spoke together, on your channel. So happy to be here. This is one of my favorite streams to come on. Really looking forward to seeing, kind of what we can unpack here tonight. In regards to my expectations, going to Europe for the first time, it's funny that you bring that up. I think that's a great question, because I don't think, and I have had opportunities to go to Europe in the past before I had a better understanding of the European civilization, European culture. And I think a lot of times I turned it down. I traveled through South America quite a bit. I didn't really understand the type of a really true, like, visceral connection that someone can feel going back to their ancestral homelands. And so this is something that I could have done a while ago. I didn't do it. And my wife had brought up the idea of going to Europe, and she had actually shopped around different countries. Where could we go? Where's our money going to go the furthest? What is going to be the least blessed with diversity? Of course, that was something that we were considering as well when planning a peaceful vacation. And we decided to go to Hungary for around 8 or 9 days. It's rare in life that something happens that actually lives up or perhaps even exceeds your expectations. And I would say that even going to Hungary, an area where I don't really have any blood lineage to, as far as I know, I still did feel a real sense of belonging and really an appreciation for the majesty that the Western man has built. I would love to talk a little bit more about this in terms of architecture. I think that's the first thing I noticed when I went over there. In fact, I was tweeting about it, and you and I were talking about it back and forth, Jared, which is, coming from New York, everything that we see here, in the Northeast and the tri-state area, our architecture is just so strictly pragmatic. So many buildings, office buildings, these things are designed just to fit as many people in it as possible, to make as much money as possible for their owners, the landlords, or whatever. So many houses that you see in Queens, they all look the same, and it can be very depressing. And if you go further out on Long Island, you'll just see strip malls and storage facilities. These are quite demoralizing things to stare at every day. You walk around the streets in Budapest, and everything just looks nicer. The architecture is much more aesthetically pleasing. It, of course, can trace its lineage back far further than what we have here in New York. And just that aspect alone, I found to be quite inspiring. The effect that high culture can have on your own sense of well-being, I think, is something that's lost, unfortunately, on a lot of white Americans.
And that's something you were anticipating? Because, before we get into more details, we just want to kind of get all the different things that were going through your head, and to the degree you would want to share, maybe even your wife's head, if you want to share anything about that, of what you both were thinking and talking about and expecting and looking out for before you got on that plane, or maybe when you were on that plane and before you landed.
Yeah, I was expecting to be impressed by the architecture and to enjoy my time there, but I actually think that it exceeded my expectations. And it's funny, I think that my wife, she's been to Europe many times, had a better idea of what to expect, and was kind of like saying, "Hey, you have no idea how much fun you're going to have over there," especially considering what we all like to discuss and what we kind of devote so much of our time to here on the internet. So I would say it actually exceeded my expectations. And the topic of architecture and high culture, I think what really helped me appreciate the majesty of the European man and what we've accomplished was going to old churches. Seeing artwork that is in many cases centuries old, seeing these buildings that are truly divinely inspired. And these are things that unfortunately we don't really have in America, right? And so I felt a true sense of awe the first time I walked into St. Stephen's Basilica at, wow, like we built this, our people built this. And as someone who's been in the Twin Towers back when I was a kid, or been in the Empire State Building multiple times, I don't feel that way about those buildings per se, but I did feel it going into old Catholic churches in Hungary. It was very powerful.
And then this might sound like a bit of a silly question, but we just want to get all that you can out of this. Why did you go?
Well, first of all, I mean, my wife is telling me that I have to take more vacations all the time. So there was obviously the relaxation component of it was real, but I wanted to have a better idea of what we are fighting for. Right? I mean, I could sit around here all day and I can read history books and I can read biographies and I can look at pictures of great things that our ancestors have built. And I could look at this, you know, in a book and I could say, wow, that's really beautiful. That's really impressive. That's absolutely fantastic. But there is something quite a bit different about seeing it in person. You know, I've taken just relaxing vacation trips to Costa Rica or, you know, the Bahamas in the past. And that's really just sit around the pool and do nothing. This was much more of get a better understanding of who I am. And I think more importantly, get a better grasp of what we are all collectively fighting for in the future. And I think that was really what I took away. That was truly what exceeded my expectations, was how powerful the experience was and how it kind of reinvigorated my desire to fight for all of us and our cause collectively.
That's what I expected you to say, speaking about expectations. But of course, we wanted to hear it from you, from the man himself. And were there any, just before we go on to more the experience itself, were there any negative expectations that you had or things that you were watching out for? I mean, we know Hungary, as you said, is not blessed with the diversity, but anything that you were looking out for or preparing yourself for, especially traveling with a woman?
Yeah, I mean, I have been used to traveling. When I've traveled through South America, you're going to places that are quite a bit more dangerous than New York. And even though New York certainly has its less than charitable spots, no question. But I was used to having my wits about me in a pretty serious way. And whenever you're going to a foreign country, you are expecting to stick out like a sore thumb. But what's funny is when you go to Hungary, everyone's white. It's you actually stick out quite a bit less than you think you will. So I there was nothing really that made me feel like I was. There's nothing that I was on the lookout for in a negative way. I actually felt very safe walking around at night in Budapest. Really, like I said, just exceeded my expectations overall. Really can't say enough about it, man.
If we could, that's actually, Jared, a great point you made there. If we could, maybe just for a second, from all of us, and maybe get some input from the chat as well. Traveling, whether it be to a place like Hungary or Poland, where you're less likely to be attacked, but if we say traveling in general, to a place like that, or to a place that is a bit more dangerous now. I mean, let's think about like Paris, France used to be immensely safe, and now not quite so safe. Many areas not quite so safe anymore. So if you're traveling as a man by yourself, or if you're traveling as a man with some other men, what are the kinds of measures you should take, things you should consider and concern yourself with, versus bringing a woman with you, your woman, your wife, your girlfriend, wife and children, or whatever. Jefferson, if you could, let us know. You've gone on trips elsewhere before being married. So presumably, what kind of tips would you give to young men who are traveling by themselves or just with a group of guys? Because we know there are some ideas here, there are some thoughts here that come right to mind that, well, we can defend ourselves better and everything. But also there's a danger with that, because we end up going places that are a bit too dangerous. There are a lot of ways, ladies and gentlemen, that all criminals of all races, but particularly non-white criminals, they can, I guess, make use of how we can be as helpful as we've become known to be. And they'll ask for rides. They'll come up to a man and they'll say, maybe even, and this is a great example from a woman that I had a conversation with. The man comes up to her and her husband. He's non-white. He's a little smaller than the husband. The husband thinks he could take this guy if it came right down to it. He could beat him in a fight or something. And this non-white guy wants a ride to like a coffee shop or something of that nature. So he then takes this individual with his wife in the car to the destination that this individual wanted to go to. Of course, he could have led him right into a trap. He could have led him right to a dozen other guys, malefactors that are waiting for them another guy on the street corner somewhere who would slide into the car with a firearm. So there are a lot of things to keep in mind. And this could be really helpful for those who are watching this stream and who will be traveling at some point in the near future. So Jefferson, any thoughts you have as a guy traveling alone versus a guy with a wife and children? Anything that comes to mind?
That's a great question, Jason. You know, I traveled through Brazil with Josh actually a couple times, and I can actually tell you in a weird way.
We have to have the live stream about that one day, by the way.
And in a weird way, I actually think you're if you are a responsible, reasonably intelligent, high IQ man, you're probably going to be safer traveling with a woman in the sense that you're probably going to be less predisposed to taking stupid risks. Traveling with my wife, I'm a lot less likely to have that one extra drink. A lot less likely to take a turn down this corner. Hey, let's go see what's over here. There could be a cool restaurant down there, or something to that effect. I'm just simply not going to do that. That's not a thing. That does not exist in my vocabulary when my woman's safety is in my hands. When it comes to traveling with other guys, I kind of have a different take on it than most people would say. I've spoken about this a little bit with you guys. I come from a martial arts background, and so does Josh. And that actually has the effect of, yes, I'm confident that I can handle myself, but having been beaten up so many times in training, it also gives me the idea of understanding what could be done to me should I run into someone who is more skilled. Having a realistic grasp of the fact that I'm in another country that is probably not going to have my back the same way my own country would, although if you're American at this point, that's probably debatable depending on where you're at. I kind of always took traveling with this idea of let's have fun, but let's not take any unnecessary risks in places where we don't speak the native tongue, and particularly in places that are majority non-white. I think Jason's point about that is also right on. Thankfully, when I traveled through South America, I knew a lot of people in the areas that I went that kind of explained to me, like, hey, if you're in a non-white area, they're going to look at you and they're going to think this guy's a sucker, this guy's got money, and let's be honest, our empathy does get exploited, not just in our own countries by non-whites, but by non-whites in other countries who take advantage of us, right? So I would say be cognizant of the type of trap that Jason outlined, and don't take any risks. There's no need to go down that extra corner. And when you are in a foreign country, even if you have a couple friends with you and you think there are 2 or 3 guys at a bar that are sizing you up and you think you can take him in a fight, how many other friends does that guy have? Because you've only got your crew there with you. Be safe, be responsible. And I think I said, with traveling with a woman, I feel in a sense more safe because I'm less predisposed to taking risk.
Jared, do you have any thoughts on traveling?
I traveled to Europe a couple times with girlfriends, and it's pretty much the same thing. I don't think I can add to anything too profound here to what Jefferson was saying. I've definitely had experience in cities. So I just, I always am used to having that awareness. It doesn't take you out of enjoying yourself, but I actually think it's better to live like this anyway. There's always a certain alertness, even when I'm in areas that are totally familiar to me. Every time I walk through a threshold, every time I turn a corner, I've trained myself to just have kind of 360 vision, eyes around my head. You never know what's going to be around the next corner. And I just consciously tweak that even more so, especially when in cities. I've been in Berlin with a woman. I've been in London with a woman. So it's just tweaking what your normal common sense, street smarts would be anyway. But yeah, nothing too different to think of. If something pops into my head later, I'll mention it. But a great question. I'm glad you asked it. It's a fantastic question.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that that our audience could really benefit from, the kind of knowledge that they could use in their life that could really save their lives. The reality is that white people, we need to accept this reality. And you see this in Prometheus Rising. And I'm going to be talking more about Prometheus Rising and how to use Prometheus Rising to help guide your decisions and understand who we are as a people in future going frees. The way I look at Prometheus Rising is just in the same way that mathematics is used to understand the physical universe. Math itself is not the phenomena that we are observing. It's just a way to understand the phenomena. In the same way, we can use Prometheus Rising to understand the social universe. But what I want to say is that we need to accept that as a people, compared to the other races of man, we are extremely gullible. As I have worked and managed, I've worked as a salesman, I've managed salesmen, sales teams, and it is unbelievable how wary the non-white races are of everything. They see themselves, they project themselves into every single contract and how they would behave. They project themselves and their own thoughts into every interaction and how they would behave. And as a result, they are extremely cautious about everything that's taking place. White people do the exact same thing. We project who and what we are into every contract, into every other human featherless biped around us, and we end up seeing everywhere we look is that someone we would find in the nursery room. And in reality, there are predators in the world. So first thing you need to do is accept that as a general rule, we are a gullible people. So if you accept that, you can then proceed with some intelligence that you need to make extra conscious effort about the people who are around you, the environment, your circumstance, what's taking place. As I said in that story, the story ended up being okay, but did it end up being okay? An okay ending. They ended up dropping off this guy at some location, and they weren't attacked. But were they not attacked because there was no intent to attack? Or were the individuals that were supposed to meet him there with his prey, were they unable to make it there? Was there a law enforcement car that was inopportunely parked right across from the street? There could have been a very grisly ending to that story. So the first thing that you have to do is when you are traveling, you need to realize this, particularly when you are in non-white areas, whether it's a Western country or not, because as we know, we no longer control our countries. You have to always be thinking about what's the gimmick, what's the trick, what's the plan, what's the ruse, how are you going to be had? It is a regret. And if you say to yourself, oh, that's too difficult, that's going to ruin my vacation, then don't go, or don't be surprised if you find yourself a statistic that no one will ever hear about. So as a man, I'm speaking to the men out there, it is your primary duty to take responsibility for yourself, your woman, and your children. And that's going to mean, as Jefferson was rightly pointing out, that you're going to say, well, I'm not going to go down that road because it doesn't quite look perfectly safe. I'm not going to, when the guy asked me over here, if he wants to draw me away from the street to ask a favor of me or a question of me, I'm not going to do it because this could be some sort of trap. Don't worry about being thought rude. Who cares? I mean, read about some of the atrocities that take place when people are abducted in these countries. And another real crime, and I'll pass it back to Jared, is that the kind of atrocities that are taking place in a lot of these island non-white countries, Central South American countries, on a regular basis to white tourists are not reported almost at all in America. You don't hear about any of them. You don't hear about the couple where they are abducted because they did something stupid. They picked up the hitchhiker, or the 4 foot tall non-white said, please, can you just take me 3 blocks? My leg is broken. And then he gets in the car, and then they're abducted. The man is murdered, and the woman is gang raped for weeks before she's finally killed. You never hear about that in the news. And the reason why you never hear about that in the news is because these are hush crimes. Hush crimes don't just take place in the United States or in Western countries. They also, and most predominantly, take place in non-white countries. Because if they reported on these things, you would know that there was a big difference between that group of people and the culture that they create and the kind of people that we are and the kind of culture that we create. So do not let yourself become a statistic. And maybe in the future, maybe we'll get all 4 of us on and we can talk a little bit more in depth about how to protect yourself. I know that Jefferson has trained a lot in fighting. Regrettably, I have been in a lot of fights and trained as well. You can probably tell a few missing teeth over the years. But perhaps we can get on and we can talk about that as well. Show maybe just for the guys out there when they are intended and supposed to be filling this role as the protector of their woman and their children. But Jared, I want to get back to this conversation about Hungary, and I know you are hungry to ask the next question. I had to do it.
I can't, you know what? I'm signing off. That's it. The end of the after party. I can't believe you did that. Oh, no. No, I kid. Just like on April Fool's Day. Hopefully some of you were there for that. I'm just curious as a side question, as like a fun side question to get us back in. Jefferson, did you ever have anyone assume you were from another European country before you opened your mouth and spoke English? Did you or your wife, did they assume you were from anywhere? Did they guess you were from anywhere? If you spoke to Hungarians, I mean, of course.
Yes, I have been confused actually even in other countries for a German, believe it or not, which is weird because I mean I don't have particularly light features, but I am mostly German. So I mean I guess I don't fit the stereotype of what most people, at least in America, assume, but I have been mistaken for that. I also, when it comes to how I present myself, and this kind of does tie in with Jason was just discussing, like I have this habit ingrained in me when I do travel to not wear anything flashy, because that is often associated with Americans and does make you a target for getting robbed. So like I have a nice watch that I wear whenever I do a stream. I don't wear that when I'm around anywhere. I'm not a jewelry guy anywhere, but I make sure to dress myself down a little bit to make myself less of a mark. And a lot of times someone who has that type of flashy sense of style is often confused for an American, or rather correctly assessed, not confused, correctly assessed and perceived as an American. So I have been confused as a German in the past, both in Hungary, believe it or not, and overseas. So that's the answer to your question. But just as a side note, great way to not get robbed. Don't dress flashy when you go overseas, because you will make yourself a mark. No question about it.
Yeah, that's another good point, and I totally agree. Same thing. You know, obviously I wear yellow suits and diamond rings on every finger when I'm in the States. You can tell I'm that kind of guy. But when I'm in Europe, just a t-shirt and jeans. Actually, the phenotype in southern Germany, there's guys with brown hair, brown eyes like you. I mean, it's not just the blonde and blue that we, as you said, think of in America with American movies. Obviously, there's a lot of that there. But there's different strands of the German story, just like all of our wonderful European countries. So let's get into this a little bit. You said, obviously, you're not aware, at least, you're not consciously aware of any specifically Hungarian lineage back in your family tree. But the Austro-Hungarian Empire was a big place, and there were Germanic people in there as well. I have roots that go back to the Austro-Hungarian Empire myself, my friend. So maybe we're fourth cousins or something. But what, if any, could you speak to, because I know this is among all of our favorite topics, what kind of folk, soul, ancestral connection type things did this light up in you? What do you have to say about that?
That's a great question, man. I think we discussed this a lot on the last stream that we did together. In fact, I remember when you sent me those questions, one of the first questions was, Jefferson Lee, you are very critical of Americanism. And, you know, I am oftentimes critical of the United States. I have a sense of pride from where I'm from, no doubt about it. But I am critical of how we are so materialistic, how we are exporting so much toxic culture. And I understand why there is disdain for the American media machine, you know, so on and so forth. And so as a white American, a lot of times I haven't always had pride in who I was. Some of that is media brainwashing. There's no doubt about it. But I haven't really seen, I think, in my neighborhoods throughout my life, what the European man is truly capable of for a number of reasons. Again, so going over to Europe and seeing what the Western man built, I felt like we are truly spectacular. You know, we have done something great. And then knowing that architecture like this, culture like this exists literally all over the continent, right? It's like I just went to one city where this is an anomaly. This is, in fact, the norm in many respects. I felt a true sense of pride for, you know, probably having shared genetics at some point with some man who was involved with the design of these buildings, or perhaps defending these buildings from hordes of invaders, you know, throughout history, or whatever it might be. So I actually felt a sense of pride. Again, I remember I told my wife, I I rarely pray, but I did pray in St. Stephen's Basilica because I was so overcome with the majesty of something that my ancestors had created. It really was powerful, and I felt a real sense of pride in shared blood with these people.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear if it grows in you. Kind of bookmark that if you can remember it in your head, because my experience was that, and I've spoken about this a little bit on streams, I had incredible experiences the couple of times that I've been to Europe, in and of themselves, of course. But especially after the second trip, it was as if a seed had been planted. And in the year after, the second year after, there was a longing. I would put like pictures of my wallpaper, on my computer wallpaper, of different scenes from places I'd been, and think about it and want to go to other locations in Europe. Of course, I still want to go back, and I encourage everyone in the chat who is American or Australian, or from any of the so-called colonial societies. Well, we should probably have a better word for that, right? But to experience the mother continent, to whatever degree that it makes sense, where you can go, if you can work it out, and of course be safe, find out where those no-go zones are and whatnot. But it is a life-changing thing. And so we're just getting you in the first flushes of returning recently. I don't know if you've been back, a week or two, but I'm curious if you can remember that. Check in with me if you have that experience, that it's like this tether that is now connected, and you have almost like a homing device inside of you. Like,
I am already planning the next trip back. And in fact, while I was there, my wife and I were talking. I'm like, all right, well, what can we do next time? How long can I get off from work? And what are maybe 2 countries that we can hit next time and get a more full experience? And I'm actually looking to do this in conjunction with some ancestry stuff I'm going to be doing on my own. So I'm trying to find a way to go back to countries that I know that I am descended from, to really get a better feel. But I was already planning a return trip 4 days in, my friend. So that the seed has been planted. I'm already thinking about it.
It's great to hear.
It is. I got to jump in with a question that I think is really pertinent to what both of you had just said, and that is this. And I'm gonna pose it to Jefferson here, our guest. Jordan Peterson's demands that whites not take pride in our accomplishments, our history, the things that our ancestors have done. In fact, he pathologizes it and says that it is somehow a mental illness to take pride in our people. Now, of course, I disagree with this. I've spoken about it, and I'd like to get your take on his claiming that it is a pathology for you to take pride in your going there and feeling this magic inside of you that both you and Jared have just mentioned, that this is some kind of mental illness, that you would take pride in the accomplishments of our people. So please speak to that if you would.
Did you call anyone and ask them how to trigger me before we went live? You really just threw a breaking ball down the middle of the plate. I'm ready to take a big swing at this point.
You know, we do intense research here on the After Party. We try to be the most prepared stream on the internet.
I did pitch for a little while, so I could throw a pretty mean curve ball. So,
all right, let me take a bite into this one. I really don't like that man, Jordan Peterson, and for a variety of reasons. But that one comment that he made in particular, and I remember hearing that over a year ago, and thinking to myself that comment itself is pathological. This idea that a man himself, that Jefferson Lee or Jared or Jason, that we are somehow a person who has no connection to the past in any way, shape, or form, which of course is absurd. We think in languages that are formed by our ancestors, right? I mean, no man is it's an old saying here, but no man is an island. No man is truly an individual. Yes, there is this unfortunate dialectic we're stuck upon to choose between the individual and the collective, the one and the many. But the reality is these things interact with one another. That comment by Peterson was one of the first things that made me really think that he was not really the best actor, the best type of person to be speaking out for our people, because it robs us of fighting for our civilizations, right? You go over to Europe, you look around at again, I've said this a million times already, the architecture, you look around at the art, the culture and whatnot, and you think to yourself, if whites become a minority, or if whites are removed from these areas, all of this is gone. And does Jordan Peterson really think that African migrants are going to treat these great feats of art and architecture with the same degree of love and care that we do? Of course not. It's not their story. They're probably not even capable of understanding how much it can mean. It does not come from their own kind. So I think that Peterson's statement there is the true pathological statement. That to me is one of the main quotes that he made, or comments that he made, that showed me that he was no friend of the white man. He's no friend of the Western man at all. Just another person who is rebranding neoliberal capitalism and trying to sell to us while pretending that he is fighting off against the most recent left-wing progressive revolutions like, transgenderism or whatnot. This is not someone who's providing us any answers, and he's either insane or lying to you, because I really see no other way that one could look at this. How could a white Canadian man view his story as something different from the European continent? It's just insane. Just insane.
Because we have that strand of trying to transcend things, and when it's out of balance, just like anything, any trait can express itself positively or negatively. I did a video on this. I believe that he has that trait very strongly, as a lot of us are tempted to, and he doesn't have it anchored. He doesn't have it balanced with other things, and so he is an imbalanced, or as you say, Jefferson, you could say that when it goes too far, it is a pathology of being too far to this side of the curve and not being well-rounded. And unfortunately, it is a trait of ours that we have to watch out for. And not that I would ever at any point in my life have said anything like what Jordan Peterson said, but I felt it in myself. I felt that desire, that need to, I can float above this. I can transcend the circumstances of my life. And that is that instinct, when it propels us to explore and create the architecture that you saw, is something that brings profound majesty into the world. But like anything, that it's a power and it's a two-edged sword. And that's why we need to have conversations like this, because we all need to remind each other of this and be able to wield this power. Again, no one's talking in the mainstream media about things like this. Children aren't going to hear messages like this unless we have education. We have parents that are, again, equipped with things like this. Jason, I see you nodding your head, so please jump in.
Oh, I'm agreeing completely. And I knew that you have spoken several times, especially since we first met, about traveling to Europe, feeling that connection, feeling that energy. And this is something, of course, that Jordan Peterson would say, that you were suffering some sort of a profound sickness. Jefferson, you as well, me as well. I feel an intense energy and magic and power and fire that wells up inside of me when I see this, and you all will as well. The thing is that I've spoken about, we have a biospirit. Our biospirit projects itself onto our environments. You can think about it crudely as instinct. We feel harmony when we see that reflected back at us from our environment, and it gives us strength. Taking pride in what your people has done instills energy in you, instills a belief that you can climb up on their shoulders and do similarly great things. This is not a sickness. To deprive you of that is to break you as a person. It is to deprive you of a place in the universe, a place in our continuum. Look at all of the people. In fact, the groups now that Peterson, these non-white groups, that he endorses their identity politics, essentially, but while saying that he opposes identity politics. He wants to build a history for them to stand on. He apologizes for them by saying they don't have a history. So this is something that if somebody comes to you and says that taking pride in your people is somehow pathological, is somehow ill, they are, as Jefferson said, they're either defective individuals or they are consciously undermining your survival, our identity, our ability to defend ourselves. If you have nothing to take pride in, no history, no past that is glorious, for which you can feel great pride and dignity, then you have nothing to preserve. You're just a cog in a machine for these trillionaire capitalists to do with as they want. Jefferson, I saw your mic come on. Please take it away, brother.
Well, you just kind of lit a fire in my own head, something that I've been thinking about, and this is why I've recently been kind of obsessed with trying to figure out more about what my grandparents were like, my grandparents that came directly over from Europe, is this type of individualism that Jordan Peterson is advocating for is harmful in more ways than we're even addressing right now. Obviously, one should take pride in the accomplishments of their ancestors. It gives them a certain type of esteem. It helps them carry themselves in a better way. And it does give you a better sense of who you are. But just think about the past of this idea that, if someone was from a family of intellectuals, they would be expected to become an intellectual. Or you could look at, for example, in the old Soviet Union, a lot of their best warriors come out of Georgia, right? The nation of Georgia. You're from Georgia. You're known to be a good fighter. This is part of who you are. It defines you as a person. This type of individualism where we like reject our parents' abilities and talents. We don't find out anything about our past. And then we go forward into universities where we spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars in many cases to try to find out what we're good at. Well, this could all easily be solved if we had some respect for our tradition. Now, I'm not saying that I would advocate for a type of ironclad system where you must be what your father was, or you must be what your mother was. Or I get that we should have the ability to have some type of meritocratic society and you should pursue your own talents. But let's start with finding out who we are, finding out what we are good at, and building off the work of our ancestors. I wish I knew what my grandfather and great grandfather were good at, what they were talented at. I wish I knew these types of things. Instead, I'm trying to put that together now. And it's very, very frustrating. And we certainly lack that as compared to some non-white societies. I mean, many East Asian societies don't have this problem. They know what they're expected to do. They inherit their talents from their parents, and they work hard at them later in life. So I think this individualistic mentality is dangerous. And it's ironic that Peterson would spout this when he talks about things like, he does touch on things like race and IQ, but only loosely. These things are all heritable. Mm-hmm. How could one not build off the accomplishments of their ancestors when Peterson is literally saying in some of his videos, well, if you have an IQ in this range, or you're not going to be a lawyer, or you're not going to be this or that. Well, these are things that are heritable. These are things that we get from our parents. We should understand what our story is to be better at things in our own life.
Yeah, absolutely. For any of our TAP super fans, forgive me if I said this very thing. I know I've said it before, but it might have been on the first time Jefferson appeared back in December. But I'll just quickly say, it's funny, I was thinking of it before you said East Asians. I worked with a Chinese guy who had a family book that went back 21 or 22 generations. If you really sit there and contemplate that for a moment, if we all had that, it could actually bring a tear to your eye to think of what we don't know and what is being preserved in his culture. That is a striking contrast and points to the kinds of things that we need to get back to. Also, some of you may be aware of the ancestor effect, something that's been studied where when people reflect on and think about their own ancestors and take pride in it, maybe this is why there's an agenda for us not to. Scientific studies have shown that people do better on exams, they do better on athletic performances, things of this nature. It's measurable.
It's you're upholding a legacy, right? Yeah, you're charged with upholding a legacy. It empowers you. Obviously, someone can fall short of that. It does happen from time to time, whatever. But upholding a legacy is a serious responsibility, and I think it is in the character of all great men to rise to great challenges, which is exactly what upholding a family legacy is. And we need more of that. And Jordan Peterson is trying to rob you of that. And that's why we should reject him at all costs.
Yeah, I mean, he has those weird ties with the UN, and it's either a planned honeypot to keep you thinking that you're doing something a little against the system, but not really, not connecting all the dots, or he himself is a tragic modern man who, as I say sometimes, one of the tragedies of modernity is he has certain circuits in himself that are just cut from one another, not holistic, not all synthesized and talking to one another. He's fractured inside. If he really believes what he believes, if he can say, like you were saying, Jefferson, something about this subject and compartmentalize it and not be able to connect it to something else that's so obvious and should be self-evident. But I have a quick question. Were you in the countryside at all, or just in a city? Were you just in Budapest?
I was only in the city. I know. I really wanted to go to the countryside, but I didn't have time to get out there. Yeah.
Okay. And also, you mentioned other countries before. What mind telling us what countries you're thinking of returning to when you return to Europe?
Got to be Germany. That's probably number one on my list. That's where most of my ancestry comes from. Germany and Austria are two places that
Yeah.
I really want to visit. Those are two countries that I've always been fascinated with. All of my favorite philosophers come out of Germany. So I would like to understand more. I want to understand where my parents came from, where my people came from.
Yeah, let me tell you something. Taking a train along the Rhine River at night as the sun was setting, climbing in the ruins of a castle from the 1300s, hiking in the Black Forest are some of the peak experiences of my life, and things that it's still in here right now, and it's part of why I'm doing what I'm doing. So I do recommend going to Germany, and I as well want to go to Austria, Switzerland. I really want to see the Alps. I didn't make it to any of the Alpine regions, but that has been really calling me. Jason,
Let's
did
jump
you?
in with some super chats.
Yeah.
We have Luke actually got started right off the bat today. Super chatting $30 by way of the familiar alternative. Thank you very much for your investment in white well-being, my good friend. He writes, want to wish all in the community a wonderful Easter. Enjoy the spring of the western sunrise. Hail the folk. Thank you very much for that, Luke. We have Billahora super chatting with $5. Notre Dame, inspired only by Christ, and that inspiration expressed in such ineffable beauty by the mind and hand of only our white biospirit. Very well said, Billahora. Thank you very much for the kind super chat. And we have the Glaze super chatting $4.99. There's talk of debasing Notre Dame by giving it a ghastly modern roof. Do you think they'll turn it into a twisted monument to, we say multiracialism, my good friend, to multiracialism? Well, Jefferson, do you think that they will turn the roof of Notre Dame into a monument, ghastly monument to multiracialism?
Hard to give a concrete answer, but they're certainly going to try now, aren't they? Any attempt to defile Notre Dame with grotesque modern architecture or monuments to diversity and everything like that are going to be, I think, really perhaps a final test to the mettle of the French people. I pray that the French don't allow it to happen, but I think there's no question in my mind that Macron and his ilk are certainly thinking about doing it. It's just going to come down to who has the will. Is it the French people and the yellow vests who are actively protecting and trying to clean up all this classic architecture that has been vandalized by migrants, or is it going to be the traitorous globalists led by Macron? It's going to be a showdown. I hope that that Notre Dame is preserved in the best way possible.
And no matter how it's built, I think this is telling. I'm sure a lot in our audience have seen this, that an international design contest has been announced. I don't know if this was just an idea floated or if this is officially what is now going to happen. But just the fact that we can't have anything that's ours, it has to be this kumbaya, the whole world holding hands, people from all around the world submit designs. No, it's something from a specific people and a specific culture. If there was a fire in the Taj Mahal, why would one of us be asked how the Taj Mahal should be rebuilt? It's not part of our history and legacy. It would be a shame, but I wouldn't have the same connection to it. None of us would have the same connection to it. Just the fact that it always has to be this angle, this frame of an international design contest. It always has to be democratic, everyone at the table. This is the frame that we need to break out of, and a lot of people are still in. But let's get to some things like this. This should be fun. Let's do some comparisons to your experience in the United States. Now, I know a week and a half in another country traveling is nothing at all like living there, so we have to get that out of the way. We have to be fair about that. So traveling and living, two different things. It's very limited. I myself have experienced that. But knowing that there's some limits there, let's compare some of your experiences in the United States, being an American, to what you saw over there. And let's start with civility, or just the manner in which people interact with one another, personally, in a cafe, on the streets, anything that you can think of in that general regard.
The Hungarians that I interacted with were extremely friendly. I never really had any issues with anyone. I think overall, the Hungarians are far more civil. But I want to make a distinction here, though. I think this is important. Being a guy who comes from New York, there's a type of incivility in New York now that is relatively new compared to the old type of incivility that used to exist in New York. There used to be this type of brusque Irish, Italian, tough guy aspect to a lot of working class areas in New York City. That yes, someone might be short with you, they might be curt with you, but there still was this idea of a community. We are these people, and if someone hurts our community, there's going to be a problem. And I do kind of like that. I like that old school New York business-like mentality. That I think in many respects doesn't exist anymore. I mean, so many areas in New York are now minority white, and so you don't see it. The new type of incivility in New York is a type of chaos where people don't speak the same language. Everyone is looking over another person's shoulder because there's no shared culture, and so as such, no one knows what to expect from an interaction with anyone on any given day, and that makes all of us less trusting. It brings our guards up much higher and makes this area, I mean, let's be honest, a really crappy place to live as compared to a homogenous society where we can understand that everyone is likely Christian or culturally Christian. Everyone is European, and there's that high trust aspect that even though, yes, you talk to me, you hear my voice, you know right away, this guy's probably from New York. I understand that. But there's a degree of trust and humility there that is lacking in interactions, at least in the area that I live in, where I'm from. So present day New York versus present day Hungary. Present day Hungary is far more civil. Yeah,
you again made me think of a story with a coworker. I remember a woman from Japan who came over here and was working in a sales position and so had to interface with the public. And she said, this was a very striking comment, and it's basically a different way of saying what you just said. I'll never forget the way she said it to me. And she's very sincere and, polite Japanese and used to certain formalities in Japan. She was explaining to me some of the things about her culture. And she said, I never know what to expect. She was very disconcerted. Different people that she would have to deal with in this business from different cultures and backgrounds, the expectations, the social signals, what's considered rude, what's considered not rude, all of that. She was just, it was exhausting to her. She didn't know what to expect.
It reminds me of that term. It's not quite the same thing. I think it was Sam Francis who said it, anarcho-tyranny. There is an anarchic aspect to social interaction in New York. I agree. Even amongst whites who've become so polarized in the United States, you don't even know what you can say on a person-to-person basis. Even though I'm no longer a fan of Trump, you still have to be careful who you talk to about that, right? I mean, you are essentially living in a thought crime area. And then the unfortunate part about being white is that we are the ones in our own countries that our ancestors built who are not allowed to express our opinions, where any non-white on a New York City subway could say the most terrible racial or ethnic slurs about any white group or whatever, and walk away totally scot-free, where the rest of us are being forced to duck and cover in our daily social interactions. And I think anyone coming from Japan, where obviously it's almost completely Japanese, was going to be blown away by the lack of reasonable expectations on the most basic social interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jason, I think it was Sam Francis, and then of course Frody Midjord, our friend Frody, who did the Skansa Forum. That was the most recent Skansa Forum topic. All the speeches were centered around anarcho-tyranny. But that is essentially, you're describing an aspect of it there.
Yeah, it's ultimately it comes down to that the regime, of course, is anti-white, and so therefore it is going to apply the law and dilate the law to inflict harm on us when doing so, just for any reason, but certainly when doing so prevents us from hobbling or undermining their efforts to inflict harm on our people and our civilization. A friend just today sent me some photographs of another statue of a white person that they are not sure what they want to do with, and I haven't looked into it, regrettably, so I don't know. Perhaps someone in the chat knows and can bring me up to speed on it. But it's a statue of a white person somewhere in Western civilization. And the anti-whites want to tear it down, of course, as part of white erasure, because eradicating the things that we create inflicts harm on us. And the city or what town doesn't quite know what to do. So what they've done instead is temporarily they have thrown like a bag over this statue and a rope around the throat of the statue. It is really a macabre situation, and in many ways speaks to in a poetic, in a really black poetic way, what is happening to us in our civilization. It is white erasure. And we can look to Notre Dame and we can see this fire that, of course, we can't speculate on YouTube about it being anything other than the regime says that it is. But of course, there were other churches that have been set on fire across the West here at Easter time. I can assure you that if mosques were being burnt down or synagogues burnt to the ground during their holidays, we would all know about it. Certainly their most prominent mosques and synagogues being burnt and their steeples falling to the ground, we would all be, I guess, presented with people wringing their tearing at their clothing and at their hair and crying, and that message would be conveyed to us. And then there would flash up these different organizations would come into existence, staffed by white people that would say, give your money now, and we're going to send it to these groups of people to help them in their hour of sadness over this. And of course, they would all be talking about how white people were most likely to blame as a result of it. So now we have the steeple that came down. We have this great monument to the biospirit of Western kind that was engulfed in flame. And of course, what do they want to do? They're talking about this potential multiracial roof and ceiling to this thing. So what is that? That is white erasure. We always have to label these things exactly what they are. This is not a celebration to multiracialism. It is white erasure. They're going to use the pretext that this is about, bringing the world together or some kind of asininity like that. The reality is white erasure. Repeat that every time you talk about it. Even when they speculate, even when they say maybe we should have a roof that is multiracial in its character and represents the people from all around the globe, you should immediately infuse into that conversation that why would that person or individuals recommending that be so anti-white that they would want to inflict white erasure on Western civilization in France, where it exists. Where else does it exist? Why would they want to erase it from where it exists? This is the kind of things we need to be doing.
Yeah, I just want to add to that real quick, Jason. You hear these stories and theories about World War II, and a lot of people point to one of the worst atrocities that doesn't get spoken about very much, which was the bombing of Dresden by the British, the firebombing of Dresden. And there are a lot of historians that will talk about that the reason why Dresden was essentially torched by the British was because it was such a strong cultural area. And if you want to go in and co-opt a society, you have to make them forget who they are. You have to torch things that give these people a true visceral connection with their land. And I think in that respect, the elites, and I'm not going to engage in conspiracy theory here. I don't know what happened in Paris with the burning of Notre Dame, and I discussed all the different scenarios as I saw it on my stream on Wednesday. But the elites are happy about this, right? These are people that have been attempting to detach the French man from the majesty of his nation for, decades, perhaps even a century. And so just like Rahm Emanuel once said, never let a good crisis go to waste. Well, the idea they're going to have an international committee rebuild a great piece of French architecture, that suggestion in and of itself is completely grotesque in just the most egregious way possible. And that's what it is. If they can convince younger generations that Notre Dame was never a European monument, that it was never something built by the white man or by the French man, but now all they know is this multicultural garbage replacement for this great monument, that is another step to destroying the culture of the French. And that, of course, is exactly what they want.
I was trying to recall, I don't know it's on the tip of my tongue. Greg Johnson said something, I think it was Greg Johnson, about, in a few more years, I forget what he said, something about, someone remind me in the chat, the Twin Towers, people will think that instead of what we know of as 9/11, it's this whole other like ridiculous story. But it's essentially what you just said, that there's going to be this rewriting of history if we don't stop what's going on now, where everything will be like, oh yeah, it was like London started as an Arabic settlement in the year 10 AD or something. It'll all be just the way that they want to write it. They're tearing out the pages of history. What about all right, let's do everyone's favorite multicultural trope, food. Let's indulge in the senses for a moment. What was the food situation like over there, and how does it compare to the States?
Obviously, the food there was delicious. A lot of different types of European food to be had in Budapest, all of which was top notch. In fact, the best Greek food I've ever had was in Budapest. Granted, I've never been to Greece, so perhaps I'm kind of talking out of my ass a little bit here. However, delicious Greek food over there. Even the Italian food was quite good. I will say, however, as a true prideful New Yorker, the only thing that Budapest couldn't beat us on was the pizza. There's still great pizza in New York. It is the last stand, as Richard Spencer would say, of implicit white identity, is the pizza in New York. But that's probably the only thing that I would have said that they do better over there. And I'll say this too, as someone who's into health and fitness. I was telling my wife, going to like the morning like continental breakfast at the hotel that we were at a couple times. It's like, yeah, I get why Europeans are so much less fatter than us. So much less fat than us. The food choices that are being offered to you by a lot of these places are a lot healthier than what you would see at a lot of restaurants and institutions here in the United States. And as someone who has been engaged in athletics and fitness like literally my entire life, I noticed these things. Didn't really see a whole hell of a lot of obese people walking around in Budapest, which is quite telling because you do hear these stories about Americans being the fattest country in the world. And when you travel, you do notice these differences. So yeah, the cuisine was great, but I would say in many respects, it's quite a bit more healthy than what we have over here.
Let me ask you, I guess the first question let me also for those watching right now, if you have questions for Jefferson, Jared, or myself, please make sure you tag me and or Jared, and that'll make it easier for us to see the questions, and we will be sure to address them during the course of the show. So I want to ask Jefferson your thoughts on there is a lot of energy and hope in the United States. I think even some in Canada as well, about Eastern Europe, and a lot of faith that's being put in Eastern Europe as a bastion for whites, and perhaps a safe zone that they can run to in the future. And of course, I speak out against this idea that you're going to be able to run anywhere. That does not mean, I don't want anybody to misunderstand this, as it often gets misunderstood, that you should stay in a non-white area, or an area that was white and now is violent and non-white. You have your family. No, you should leave that area. You should move to a new area where you can continue the struggle for white well-being safely. Your family will be safe. Please do that. What I'm talking about is, in general, your areas, there's not going to be a place that we can run away to any longer. For too long, our people have always had someplace else to go where we could create our Western civilization unpolluted by these petty tyrants that come to the helm of our countries, and the invasions of non-whites as well into our countries. There's always been some place to run away, but there isn't a place to run away to anymore, and we need to get rid of this mindset that we're going to run somewhere. But for many, they're still looking toward Eastern Europe, and they're seeing these white countries, and they're seeing some nationalistic leadership there, I guess. But then we also see in very recent time, we see people like me my content being banned from those countries. We see Jared Taylor being specifically banned in his person, and that ban being requested by Poland. I reject, by the way, this idea that all of these things are happening against the wishes of these massively nationalistic and pro-white countries. It's just some bureaucrat in some little office that is deciding to ban this content and to ban these people. That's hogwash. So what are your thoughts on this idea that Eastern Europe is somehow this safe haven that is blooming now that we can all just run to if things get bad enough. And really, folks, ultimately, this is just a coward's way out. If you are of the mind right now that you're saying, well, I'll just take off to Eastern Europe. A lot of people used to say that about New Zealand. I'll just take off to New Zealand if it gets too bad. You're being a coward, and it's okay. You have to make a decision to be brave. You're not brave unless you feel fear. If you don't feel fear, then you're psychotic. So the way you are brave is by overcoming the fear and doing the right thing. And the right thing is that we have to fight for every inch of what is ours. That is the right thing to do. There is no flight to some safe zone. So I'll pass it over to you, Jefferson, to get your thoughts on that.
I think that's a question that we could probably collectively do 2 hours on, because there's a lot to unpack there. In a way, Eastern Europe is better off than Western Europe, and in a way, it's worse, but it's not as obvious as a lot of people want to make it seem. Eastern Europe is very interesting because these countries that were behind the Iron Curtain for so long, that were behind these totalitarian, communist regimes, in a way have benefited from communism in the long term, because the type of media censorship over there kept a lot of the hyper-toxic Hollywood, anti-white, self-hating, nihilistic culture out of their countries, right? And so they do have a stronger sense of who they are. Christianity is far more prevalent in a lot of these nations as a result of it not being taken down so much by a lot of really garbage Western propaganda, And so in that respect, they've been shielded from it. It does make them stronger. And there is a nationalistic identity in that, when someone pushes up against you and you're a healthy individual, I would think you're going to push back. And so when you have the communists coming in, attempting to suppress Hungarian identity or Polish identity, I mean, you can find these stories during both the National Socialist and communist occupations of Poland. The Polish people would go out into the streets to celebrate their holidays, even though they knew they were going to be gunned down or arrested by communists for doing so. So there was this attempt to preserve a very strict sense of national identity. However, that has, I think, a negative side effect in the way they view people like Jared Taylor, and that we, being kind of pan-European mutts in a sense, have a much stronger sense of racial identity. And I think that that's kind of important right now, because the friend and enemy distinction is not Dutch versus British. It's unfortunately being drawn at white and non-white by the powers that be. And so I think that the Polish establishment, I mean, let's not forget, I believe Richard Spencer was arrested going to Hungary a few years back. They view themselves as Hungarians first and foremost, and not as whites. And so when they have someone coming in and preaching a different type of identity or different type of worldview, even if I do fundamentally agree more with Richard or more with Jared than perhaps a Hungarian nationalist, that person is ultimately preaching ideas that might be dangerous to just the strict concept of Hungarian national identity. And I just want to say one last thing here to touch on the concept of Western Europe. While I was in Hungary, actually, a viewer of mine DM'd me on Twitter and sent me a very interesting article, which unfortunately I don't have pulled up. But a young gentleman who is around 36 years old. He is the head of the Dutch far right-wing party. And they were talking about recent elections in Holland and how this particular party won the largest share of seats in Dutch parliament with, I believe, 15%, which, considering how many parties there are, was quite large. And this viewer sent me an interview with this guy. And it was quite interesting that this Dutch politician had a sense of white identity because his nation has been more affected by diversity. Now, he wasn't coming out and saying things maybe as explicitly as we were, but this guy actually got in trouble for using a Dutch word that could be loosely translated to Aryan in one of his speeches. And he actually spoke about the majesty of Europe as a whole, spoke about things like the importance of classical music and how Mozart and Beethoven, these non-Dutch men, are such a great credit to the West. So I think areas where whites are under the most explicit attack, we actually seem to form a more cohesive pan-European identity, whereas in Hungary and Poland, yes, they are technically doing better and they are safer places to live in. They're not quite as on board with the sense of pan-European identity that the rest of us are kind of forging.
Well, and was any of that, did you experience any of that directly?
Well, there's a a museum in Hungary that it's like it's called the Terror House, and it's explicitly designed to show the atrocities of the Nazis and the communists and all this other stuff while they were in charge. Now, to be honest with you, it's quite a bit. It's whitewashed a little bit for sure from what I actually know about the Hungarian Revolution and so on and so forth. But there is a very strict sense of, yes, we are Hungarian, which I think again is healthy, but it does lead them to, I think, rejecting people like Jared or like Richard, who perceive the fact that even though these countries are better off than us demographically and culturally, they are still ultimately under attack by the same forces who have effectively destroyed our nations.
Quick thing, Taylor Garza, who is in our chat often, helped me out and said, hey, this is what you were trying to remember, Jared. Greg Johnson said there will be a time, if all this continues in a couple of decades, when we're taught that 9/11 was done by white nationalists. That's what I was grasping for before. I thought that was a funny observation by Greg Johnson. And yeah, I've heard of what you're saying before. I can't speak personally to having been in Eastern Europe, but I have to wonder how much of it is just there's still the tentacles of the regime in those countries. How much of it is that versus what you were saying? I'm sure in all European countries, what you're saying is there, it's viable, and it should be. You should and you will have that more visceral connection to your own nation. However, I have heard, speaking of people like Greg Johnson, I think he has said to us, because we asked him something about this on one of our streams when he was our guest, he has spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe, and some of his colleagues on the board of Countercurrents, the publishers, have been over there and spending quite a lot of time, Hungary and Estonia, I believe. He was reporting that he does see in the people that nested thing that I like to talk about, where he tells this story. You might have heard, because he's told this story on a few different occasions, where he says he was at a Hungarian opera, and then there were people who were still cheering for these songs by other European composers. It was this whole cultural festival. And then there was a performer, I don't even know if the performer himself was Hungarian, but engaged in some old Hungarian folk song. It might have been high culture, it might have been folk, but whatever it was, it meant a lot to the Hungarian people. And even though they were very excited and enthusiastic about the other European pieces, when this Hungarian song came on, they lit up, and it just went up a couple of more notches. So I've heard from people over there that there are some, I guess it's just how it strikes you. I'm not trying to counter signal you, but I'm just to get the balance into the conversation. I have heard from people who have spent significant time there, and I'm sure it's true in the West as well, that there is some portion of the population that understands that, yeah, they are Hungarian, but then nested within that is the umbrella of being European, part of Western civilization, white, and that still means a hell of a lot as well, and they understand it in the context.
Well, that's also interesting too, though, Jared, because there was an article, I'm probably going to discuss this on my next live stream, that I saw the other day where Marine Le Pen, who I am critical of it in many respects, but she actually put out a statement saying that Frexit, a French exit of the European Union, was no longer ideal, and that they wanted to co-opt the European Union as a whole with pro-European thinkers. And so I think that does show that there is a growing sense of pan-European identity. And who else to get this better than the French, right? I mean, to see Notre Dame burned down, to see Paris effectively turned into a slum in some areas, this once beautiful city, they get it. They see the difference between a German tourist and a Moroccan migrant, right? They completely understand what's going on. So I do think there is a growing consciousness, I think we can kind of meet halfway on this, towards a pan-European, more racial identity, because that's really where the battle lines are being drawn anyway.
Yeah, and we always go over this. It doesn't mean that we lose those other layers. It's just you have to understand both. You really have to balance both. We spoke to Squatting Slav back in early March, and obviously he lives in Canada right now, but he goes back to his native Serbia a lot. We spoke at length about it, and he seemed to have a good sense of that as well, and seemed to think that some of Eastern Europe is kind of on that page as well. Although he did say it's a mixed bag. Us in the West, especially, really separated across the ocean here in the United States. He did caution us to, not be so enthusiastic that we lose the nuance when we look to Eastern Europe and they're holding it out. They have the pros and the cons as well, as you were saying. I'll add, to lighten it up a little bit, I'll add one comment about the food too. I think you were going in this direction, but not only the kinds of dishes that they're serving, but my experience when I was over in Europe is the ingredients and how it's sourced as well, because that's so big. We spoke to Blonde Buttermaker a couple of weeks ago, and this touches on that great conversation we had with her. When I was in Germany, I remember I've always been health conscious, but this was a few years ago, and it was before I became even stricter, you could say, with my diet and how aware I am of what I eat. And then, of course, sometimes, you're just, when in Rome, sometimes you just have to have a little caloric energy. I had this like a berry croissant or something like that, so like a Danish kind of thing, a pastry. And usually, if I ate something like that, even some years back, because of the sugar and because I eat really pretty clean, you get like that bit of a sugar crash or feel a little dopey. Maybe a half hour later, you got to, pump yourself up again. I had nothing like that. It felt so clean. I'm like walking around Berlin, and even though I just had this sugary pastry, it wasn't like, you eat something like that in the States and it just feels like there's like glue going through your veins. Everything is just so much cleaner. Even if you eat something like that, the wheat is not as compromised. They're not using artificial sweeteners, preservatives. I remember part of it we stayed in hotels, part of it we stayed in people's homes. And when we were in people's homes, the refrigerators are a lot smaller than in the States. They go to the market almost every day. They keep things a lot more fresh, and because things don't have preservatives, they don't last more than a day or two. And you really do feel it.
Well, in America, we are truly living in downstream from this legacy of an uber capitalistic infrastructure, right? So even if you go to Europe and you drink a Coca-Cola, you're going to notice that it tastes a lot better. It comes in a glass bottle, and it is because the Coca-Cola in Europe is made with sugarcane, whereas the Coca-Cola in the United States is made with high fructose corn syrup, because the corn lobby paid off politicians to put tariffs on sugarcane and therefore give them a monopoly on what they can put in sodas. So there's a valid reason, why foods make you feel so much more terrible in the United States, particularly if you're not sourcing them correctly, because there are companies that do put toxic things in the food because they make more money doing it. And that's definitely less prevalent, I think, overseas.
Yeah, there's a metaphor there, and we talk about food, and hopefully most people in this audience would appreciate it. And I really do recommend people check out the Blonde Buttermaker episode from a couple of weeks ago if you haven't already. But even if you're like, oh, what are these guys spending time talking about pastries for? No, actually, there's a lot to say about the choices of how you get those food products to people and what you're going to regulate. It says a lot about the culture. I remember the bread. Oh man, going and seeing bakeries in Amsterdam or Berlin, and how much pride they have in these like beautiful round, the whole roll of it, with some of it has like carrots and other stuff. They do all this crazy stuff with bread, and it's just so much more rich and nutritious looking and clean and better sourced than what you're going to get in a lot of the States. Not to bash on the States, there is, and I like to see this, a growing pushback where people are looking for more locally sourced kinds of art or artisanal kinds of foods and products. And I know that kind of gets wrapped up stereotypically with lefty types, but we've talked about this on this show before. I think we need to claim a little of that and not let people's perception think that that's just a quote unquote left kind of thing to worry about. I mean, I know all three of us here, our primary concern is not really that left-right dichotomy anyway. A lot of that is kind of old and tired as it is.
I want to point out, great point, Jared. I want to point out, and then we have a super chat question for Jefferson as well, that the soil now for white people to come together as Western kind, to get rid of this now millennia of fighting each other because each little group has had a petty chieftain that put his or her interests above the interests of our people. The soil now is becoming increasingly richer for that all to die away and for new people to come out of this. So there will be a people that will come out of the white race as a whole. And that's what we're building here. We're building a people out of this race. That is what these regimes the regime, which of course the regime represents the anti-whites who are in charge. And we talk about that, the government, the media, the universities, the major churches, etc. The regime across all of these European nations and across the entirety of the West are extremely afraid of a unifying message, and specifically this one that we are building, white well-being, because the soil, they have caused the soil to be extremely rich. How have they done that? Because they attack us as a group. And even the thickest members of our race will eventually realize, if we never came to them, but we are going out to them. Each and every one of us who are watching now are going out and reaching out to our brothers and sisters for white well-being, bringing this message to them so that they can realize, they can learn, they can begin going free and know that their security and safety is only going to be attainable by way of the security and safety of our people, not just the Americans or not just the Southerners or not just the Canadians, but it's going to be Western kind as a people, because we are attacked as a group, harmed as individuals, because we are attacked as a group. So even if we didn't go out to our community, out to our people, out into our families and friends' backyards, at the barbecues and all coming up in summer in the Northern Hemisphere. Even if we didn't do that, even the dumbest members of our community would finally realize, well, geez, I'm suffering because all white people are suffering. That is something that terrifies the anti-white elites. They absolutely cannot have the French whites joining with the German whites, joining with the Hungarian whites, setting all of these, as Jared likes to put it, these nested identities into a proper place in their lives. So that, yes, they are American, or yes, they are French, yes, they are Christian, or yes, they are pagan, yes, what they're atheists. But first, and that they are white, Westmen, members of Western kind. That is what they fear, the anti-whites fear most of all, because as people start leaning this direction, and they are leaning this direction more and more, this message becomes extremely acceptable. And particularly white well-being, the dialectics and the lexicon that we use here, can be picked up by whites in any country across the West. That is terrifying to them. That is why we wake up the other morning and you can't get any of my content in these countries without VPNs or without changing the location on your YouTube setting to a country that has not banned the content. Who am I with my subscriber count? Nothing. Who am I relative to some of these others? What is powerful is the lexicon and the dialectic that can be picked up by all of our people and then used in their environments, made natural, made part of the landscape in their particular environments, in their particular contexts, and the policies that are moving forward there, the legislators that are passing laws in those countries. This is all malleable and can be used by any of these people in any of these contexts, in whatever, just the same way the anti-whites have created anti-whiteism to be used uniformly and yet nonetheless adaptable in all of the different Western contexts. So I want to ask Jefferson, we get to this question, and then I want to get to another question. I'm just going to mention it so we can remember. Jefferson, you mentioned your wife has traveled to many European countries over the years, unless I misunderstood. I'm sure she has some observations about the changes that have taken place, but that's for later. I want to get to Krillin876 super chatting with $2, and he asked, Jeff, doesn't it shock you whites moved to Bushwick? I don't know anything about Bushwick, but presumably you do.
He's referring to a neighborhood of highly questionable backgrounds. He said that's an area in Brooklyn, I believe. I'm not sure if Bushwick is completely gentrified as of yet. Brooklyn's always this like weird spectrum of some areas are gentrified, some aren't. You could be in one area of Brooklyn and be totally safe, and be in another area of Brooklyn and potentially be shot. It actually, in a lot of respects, it reminds me of going to Rio de Janeiro, where like you'll be walking down the street outside of a really nice restaurant, go to a food truck or something, make a wrong turn, and be like, I got to get the hell out of here, or I'm going to get killed. I guess when you look at the history of some of these areas in Brooklyn, a lot of these neighborhoods, I have a lot of uncles that were plumbers and carpenters, and a lot of friends that were firefighters and cops back in the 80s. These areas were war zones, from the 70s and 80s, really into the 90s. So it is astonishing to see whites moving into some of these gentrified areas, but at the same time, it's weird because it also does kind of breed some resentment also with non-whites. The blacks that you see in a lot of these areas, they don't like being forced out, and it doesn't really make anything. It's good to have a place to go, but it does continue to create resentment amongst other people that are inhabiting the United States. So would I have ever expected some of these areas that were war zones would be nicer? No, of course not. That's a good thing, but gentrification, it almost kind of kicks the can down the road, I think, in many respects. And also, one last thing, not everyone can afford to move to these areas either. These aren't, when an area is gentrified in Brooklyn, you're talking about extremely expensive rent for places that aren't where you could really raise a family. And so it has this downstream effect of also further atomizing you. So you leave your crappy area to go someplace that's majority white, but you're paying a ton of money. You can't afford to raise a family there. And the poorer whites who can't move into these neighborhoods, well, then their neighborhoods turn into third world hellholes and they're just stuck there.
Interesting perspective. I have, before we get to some more super chats, if there are any in Jason's questions, I have something from the regular chat again. Taylor Garza's helped me out tonight. Thank you, Taylor. I misspoke again before. Yes, Greg Johnson retweeted it, but it was originally Tucker that said that joke about they'll have people thinking white nationalists did 9/11. And Taylor, also asked me a question, and I am not the guy to answer this. I am not the media guy, but Jefferson is. I don't know if you've seen the show Vikings, Jefferson, but Taylor was just asking if you think, if you've seen it, if you have any thoughts on Vikings as having implicitly healthy themes, or maybe if not, if you've done any analysis on it, you could point us to, or if you plan to in the future.
When it comes to television shows, I must admit that I am blissfully ignorant of television shows. Movies, I watch a lot of movies, of course, for the Broken Hour podcast that I do with Josh. If people have suggestions or things that they would like us to cover, I'm certainly open to doing an analysis of Vikings or really any other show or movie. But unfortunately, I haven't heard of it. I only watch movies in preparation for the live stream, and I'll watch one maybe once a week with my wife. But aside from that, most of the media I consume is either preparing for my own show or me just reading books on my own time. So unfortunately, I can't help you, my friend. I don't know much about the show.
Taylor, you'll have to look elsewhere for the Vikings analysis for now. Maybe, what would be funny? I think this would be funny. Maybe Jason and I should commit, and maybe a lot of people will watch just to see if it's a train wreck, because we're not film guys and like TV guys and video game guys. You'll notice when we're on streams and other people start talking about that, we're like, so maybe we should force ourselves to do like one specific movie analysis and see how we do, see what comes of that.
Not a bad idea.
Maybe it'll be a novelty episode of TAP or After Hours at some point. So we'll see if we can get to that. Jason, I know you bookmarked the question about Jefferson's wife and her impressions of Europe has changed. Did you have anything before that, or shall we get to that?
We can jump right into that. I do have Machiavelli Sucks super chatting with $1.99. Thank you very much for the kind super chat. There is no stopping us now. Amen. There is no stopping us now. That is why you see them pulling out the censorship everywhere they go. And by the way, we got around that censorship very easily. People are able to receive my content now in Europe by following these simple steps and procedures. And when they lay down another when they lay down another bar before us, another wall, another measure of censorship, we'll just get around it again. They will never stop me. The anti-whites, if they can, the message I'll give to any anti-whites watching this is, when you do this sort of stuff, when you do the censorship and you think you already have my name, when you do this sort of stuff, for some, it scares them. And then they get depressed and they think, oh, I don't want to start another account. And really they get just down about the whole thing. They get saturnine about the whole thing. And they think, well, I might as well give up. That is the exact opposite thing that happens to me. You do go ahead. I see it as nothing more than the fights that I used to be in with anti-whites. It's just another punch in the face or a punch in the stomach in the middle of the fight. And I win in the end. So that's what's going to happen. You go ahead, censor me from another platform, and I will open 2 more platforms. And I'll get to even more people as a result. So I want to ask everybody in the chat, though, as well. That's right. It is whack-a-mole. King Elvis says that, and they will never win. We will just keep popping up, and they will never win. Their time has come to its dusk. So I want to ask everybody in the same chat, though, the question I'm posing to Jefferson, that I'm sure he's had conversations with his wife about. Have you been, and we're not going to just restrict this to Europe, but to any cities across the West, any towns across the West, have you been there at some point in the past? And then a decade later, 2 decades later, you've gone back and white erasure is in full effect. There's been a significant change. I know some of you in the UK, it's been extraordinarily heartbreaking to see some of these Trafalgar Square and these different places where you see thousands of Muslims out there praying. What was the use of all of those good young British men going to fight? And you can think about any of these brothers' wars, any of these internecine conflicts, when we marched off in great numbers and great masculinity and heroism to fight our brothers and our literal brothers and cousins out on these fields. Here, of course, in everywhere I'm sitting, I am on battlefields from the War for Southern Independence. This is where I came from. My blood and soil came up in the blood and soil of the battlefields for the War for Southern Independence. We killed the hell out of each other. And for what? For what now? So that we could be swept aside by these anti-whites who are going to move in, these alien peoples, to take our civilization. So cities and towns that you've seen and that you've gone back to, and white erasure has been inflicted on those cities and towns. Streets changed, statues taken down, street names changed, statues taken down, school names changed. What have you all seen as well? I see Laurel's in the chat. Great to see you as well. Andre, Jefferson, your wife, surely she has some stories that she has shared with you about the changes that have taken place in the cities she's visited.
Well, here's a direct quote from her on Paris. She studied in Paris for quite some time. She said that she remembers that the French were racist towards Asians, and there were gypsies begging on the subway. Muslims were only in the outskirts of the main city where she never went. And this is prior to 2008. And she used to speak fluent French. So, this is seeing what happened to France and Paris is obviously quite disturbing to her. We haven't spoken too much about other places. I have friends that have gone to Spain and have said that they are perturbed by the amount of African migrants that they see in cities like Barcelona or Madrid. I also know a lot of people that have gone to Italy that report back better things. Of course, Italy has pushed back quite a bit harder against multiculturalism than a lot of other, perhaps Western or Central European nations have. But that certainly is how my wife feels about it. And I wanted to just piggyback on one thing that you said before, Jason, that kind of really, I guess you could say, inspired me a little bit. A lot of people thought that because of Trump, that there was simply going to be a very simple political solution. We were just going to get this guy into office and he's going to do it for us and we're going to cheer him on and he's going to build the wall and then it's just suddenly going to work out. And that was a very easy pipe dream for us to fall into. It made it seem like things would never get so bad and that it would just turn around and we're going to just elect this one guy and he's going to be our noble tyrant or benevolent dictator, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And you touched on this idea, and I say this a lot on my channel. The real battle here is just getting the white man to understand who he is again, and feel a sense of community. Once we can finally establish, and I mean this in the best way possible, but this is just the reality, an us and a them.
Mm-hmm.
This is just the nature of the world. Like, I'm not happy about this. In many respects, I wish that my old libertarian viewpoint was true, but it simply is not in the way things are going. Once we kind of have a fundamental, meta political, cultural, spiritual change, everything else after that is easy. Politics is easy when we have an idea of who we are. That's the real battle. It's not who's going to win the midterms. It's not this is not relevant to our cause right now. We have degenerate, awful, traitorous whites representing us because we don't even think that we're white anymore in many respects. We're trying to live in this post-racial world. So to you guys' point about how this growing mind of white identity that, of course, should not erase ethnic European identity. I completely agree with that. Being the number one threat to the establishment, and as such, the number one thing they're trying to suppress. I totally agree. And as such, let's think about this. That you only get flack when you're over the target. No Republican, mainstream GOP Twitter page is getting banned, really, because it's useless for us and it's actually harmful. It's harmful to our cause. They go after channels like us, and our reach is a lot bigger than we think. I firmly believe that YouTube has metrics, Twitter has metrics. They know what is popular, they know what is trending, which is why there was this bogus white nationalism hearing in an attempt to shame all of us for wanting to have our own country. That's why these things are on the forefront of every politician's mind. That's why we're constantly hearing about it, because they know that white identity is the number one threat to their globalist hegemonical control. That's where the battle is. Once we win that, politics is easy.
Yeah, that's really well said, and that's something that we both wholeheartedly agree with here. Jason,
we have a couple of comments. We have Red Pill Bulgaria writing, the Netherlands is changing pretty fast. Please visit and enjoy before it's lost forever. Tagged me.
Don't say forever. I've been to Amsterdam, and I would, yeah, I can't. All of this is untenable. We're going to change it. It's not forever, but go ahead.
We also have Lisa writing, grew up in Detroit. My Polish neighborhood is now Mexican. This is why we talk about, ladies and gentlemen, this is why we talk about white erasure rather than white genocide. And if you haven't started watching my Going Free streams, you need to do so, because this is where the difference is going to be made. We are tackling the actual challenges that we have between us and the recapturing of our destiny, and therefore white well-being. And one of the big issues is persuading, the biggest issue is persuading our white brothers and sisters about what is the right thing to do in this age. Is following the anti-white morality, is that the right thing to do? Or is now standing up for white well-being the right thing to do? So this is really a battle of persuasion. The more they censor us, the easier it's going to get, because there's something called the Streisand effect. But the issue that I want to speak about here that is extremely important that I just want to note is this white genocide versus white erasure. Stop saying white genocide if you have been using it, even if you thought it was useful or powerful, or if it worked in some other scenario. It is not going to come anywhere close to working like white erasure does. And the reason why is that white genocide just draws up these ideas and these images in our brothers and sisters' minds of emaciated people in tattered clothing behind fences and being gassed. And until they see that, they don't agree that there is such a thing as white genocide. And they'll say, well, there isn't genocide because of X, Y, and Z. And then you will then have to explain how genocide actually means all of these other things. Just look at the EU and what the EU says and all. You've lost your prospect right then. They're no longer hearing anything you have to say. Just say white erasure. Because when you say white erasure, it's not just, it includes the erasure of ourselves biologically, but it also includes the erasure of us from our history books, the erasure of us from, as I mentioned, these signs. We see Lisa talking about her neighborhood. That is white erasure. Red Pill talking about how the Netherlands is changing rapidly. That is white erasure. That is something that people can see, and that is stands in too much of a contrast to what they're told about what multiracialism is supposed to mean. Another thing that you can do, one of my MCs, my meme curatives, is to say that diversity is anti-white. That diversity is the infliction of harm on white people because it means fewer white people. Diversity at a university means that there are going to be fewer white people at that university. Diversity at your place of work means that there are going to be fewer of our people at that place of work. How do they accomplish that? They accomplish that by firing you, firing me, by not ever hiring you or hiring me. So it takes place by way of an infliction of harm on our people. That is the perspective. Now, it seems that is the perspective you have to see it from. It seems like it isn't a huge, I guess, challenge to tackle. But in reality, it is massive because you are dealing with, and I'm dealing with, this enormous inertia, this current of brainwashing, this current of perspectives, of framing all these conversations by way of this anti-white lens. And it takes strength, and it takes courage, it takes tenacity to stand out against that and to say, no, what's happening here is an infliction of harm on us. You can listen. And I challenge you all to do this now and to go from here once you've heard it and to go into the chats on other shows and mention these things to begin waking our people up. You will hear other content producers talk about our situation using the perspective of anti-whites. They actually use the language of white oppression, and they use the perspective of the anti-whites in an attempt to defend us. How successful are they going to be defending us by using the perspective given them by the anti-whites? They're not going to be successful at all. How many times have you heard, and I don't even want to say it because it'll be clipped out, but how many times have you heard white positive content producers say, so I'm the fill in the anti-white slur. So we're supposed to be fill in the anti-white slur. Words have meanings. I can tell you now, from this moment until the day that you die, that the word tree means something other than it does. But no matter how many times I tell you that, you are still going to draw up a tree in your mind when I say that word. Words have power. Words are magical. This is the real magic of our day. This is the real magic of humanity, is the power of language, is the power of framing a story. And that's all the anti-white narrative is a story that we have to get off the pages of, because if we don't, it ends in a grisly conclusion for us. And so I would like, just on that subject alone, if I could, before moving on any further, I'd like to get any thoughts that Jefferson had on anything any thoughts that he had on anything I just said over the past of couple minutes.
I do agree that the term white genocide, and there are always going to be people that will argue with you on this, that is the right term, and we're facing a real tragic reality. We have to use the most explicit, disastrous term possible to wake people up. Okay, I get that, and I don't deny, none of us deny that the plight of the white man and what we're facing. But I do agree that I think it's a little bit too abrasive when you consider the lexicon of the current day. Okay, to your point about, I could convince you, I could tell you that a tree is something different, but whenever you hear the word tree, you're going to envision a tree. For better or for worse, the media has put images in our heads, like you said, of sickly, skinny people somewhere when they think of genocide. Guards with machine guns carting people off, or whatever, and that term has simply been co-opted in a way that we're probably not going to get back. And if you think about this too, the real insidiousness of what's going on here is actually that there isn't a white genocide, right? Because humans push back much more aggressively against jackbooted thugs than they do to this type of weird, brave new world type of future that we're living in. I hear people all the time say, we're living in Orwell's 1984. And I always say, no, we're living in a brave new world. We're living in a world where we are sedated by our sensory pleasures. We are kept down by mainstream media that makes us think that we're pursuing something great. And we don't ever have the call to action that is presented by a true friend and enemy distinction. And that it's white erasure is in a sense more insidious than white genocide. Because if people were coming down your street with a dump truck, shoving people into it with machine guns, you'd be like, guys, we got to do something about this right now. We're all going to die. This is a serious problem. But if every day you go on your Netflix, nothing really changes. Yes, your television shows are still there. The dumb pop music is still there. And your friends and family are still white. And you don't know anything about who you are because you listen to Jordan Peterson, but you got a clean room, though. You're not really going to be aware of this. So there is an insidiousness to what we're facing here. Erasure is more dangerous than genocide in the sense of we don't even know it's happening. And that is a real problem. It's almost like having a cancer that you don't even know is there unless you're truly in touch with your body and your health on a daily basis versus seeing a truck coming and jumping out of the way. I'd rather jump out of the way of the truck than have to go through cancer treatment. Just putting that out there.
It's a great point about it being sneaky. And it makes me think there was, I believe, one of the early feminist books of the 1950s. I don't know if it was called the book, that this was the title of the book, or rather this was just a phrase that became popular in the book, that was contained in the book. But it's the problem with no name, or the problem that doesn't have a name. I don't know if this was Betty Friedan or one of those other feminists, but we're trying to convince women that being housewives was this terrible thing, the problem that has no name. You're not even aware that you have a problem. The irony. So they built this whole architecture around that, which flows into the greater river, a tributary that flows into the greater river of anti-whiteness, as Jason has so well illustrated for us. But this really is the problem that has no name. What we're dealing with, for many, not to us here, we're aware of it, but for the people in our lives, it is the problem with no name. Yes, you're both hitting on something very important, that we have a unique challenge, and this is why we have to be creative with our arguments, with our perspectives, and the lexicon that Jason has gifted us with a lot of powerful tools in Go Free, and the way that he has really thought through the language so that people can't really slither away from it. It's going to make them confront these realities more head on, and maybe they'll resist it in the moment. But these are the kinds of things where seeds are planted, and someone's going to wake up at 3 a.m. and be like, oh yeah, there's kind of something to what he was saying. And it might take a couple of years, but it does happen. We hear other content creators say all the time, people who used to send them hate mail. Jefferson, I know hate mail is a popular spot on your show. So maybe you'll be one of these people too that say, someone sent me hate mail 2 years ago, and that same person now wrote and said, I've changed almost 180 degrees, and I'm on your page now. Okay.
Yeah.
Please, if you'd like to share anything about it, please do so.
I just had people reach out to me when I was, kind of preaching what we were talking about before, that obsessing over the GOP, as an example, is not the answer. That Trump is not the person that we hope that he would be. Pointing out the nature of the anti-white agenda and how it's not just in New York or something. It's all over the world. I've had plenty of people email me or write these insane comments like, "You don't know what you're talking about. Anyone can be an American. We're all just here living with this Constitution. You set foot you jump over that border in Texas, and by golly, you fill out those papers, and you're just like some guy whose family's been here for 400 years on the North American continent." And inevitably, you find these people are the ones who actually are sheltered. They're almost always the ones living in majority white areas where they have the luxury of believing this fiction. Whereas you find that almost all of the people who are red-pilled live in diverse areas, and they say, oh man, this is not what we were told, right? And I think I've only been doing this for a year and a half, maybe, but I've had people reach out to me and say, hey, listen, I was wrong. You were right. I see this now. And it's something oftentimes as simple as Republican voters looking at voter demographics, right? Like that's weird and, kind of, I don't fancy myself a pure empiricist, but it is weird empirical data like that does show people, oh, wait, these groups lobby for themselves and they don't lobby for America the way we do.
And that those stats will hit people. And to your point about what something I think Jason said before, all of us probably have another 0 after our subscriber count if things were really on the up and up. I have people write to me, I'm sure you guys too. I have one guy in particular I'm thinking of commented recently, said he was so annoyed. He's like, I keep getting unsubscribed to you. He keeps going back. He subscribed to the Great Order YouTube. He goes back and it's not there.
They unsubscribed to you from my channel.
Oh, yeah.
Don't you remember that? I remember you tweeted me. You were like, hey, I went to go check your live stream.
Oh, me. Yes. I can attest to this on air. I don't know if we've said this on air. I was unsubscribed from Jefferson Lee's channel. You think that at least they could do a little research and see that we know each other, we've spoken, that I'm going to catch this. But I guess it's all in the algorithms. I go back. It was like after you'd been on tap or something, or right before, and I'd definitely been subscribed to you. I go back and it's the red subscribe. I was like, what the hell?
So it's so shady. So shady.
All right. Well, we have Andrew Stewart writing buildings across Canada named after John A. Macdonald, first Prime Minister of Canada, are being changed. He has even been removed from the $10 bill, a perfect example of white erasure. And that is the kind of thing you can share with white prospects out there, our brothers and sisters. You can say it's this building today, it'll be another building tomorrow, and another building after that. And then the currency won't have anybody from our race on it any longer. In fact, there was a lot of consideration for the $20 bill, I think it was, in the United States, to take one of the greatest of all, I guess, was Andrew Jackson off, and then replace that hero of heroes. I'm a guy who was in, I was told the other day when we were on, I knew it was a great many duels during his life, but people looked it up while I was on air with Going Free, and it was over 100 some odd duels that this guy had been in. Now talk about a guy having a set on him. I mean, this was a real hero. This was a man's man, and they're gonna remove him and put like Pocahontas or somebody like this, on the $20 bill. I mean, it's utterly just white erasure. It's the kind of thing that your prospects will be able to understand. Harriet Tubman, I see Bobby Fischer wrote, yeah, it's the kind of thing that our brothers and sisters will be able to understand, and will alert them to the presence of something more that's going on, something more insidious that's going on. Jefferson makes the great point about having a cancer but not realizing it's there. And for a lot of Western kind, there is this cancer metastasizing, rapidly eating them. I mean, they go out into the world and they do see the cognitive dissonance, but then what do most of them do? They flee from it. They indulge this escapism, video games or television, or buying the next iPhone, or or going to the next restaurant. It's the escapism, but it's getting increasingly difficult. Thank God it's getting increasingly difficult to escape anti-whiteism any longer. Everywhere you go, it is present. Now, we also have a super chat from Love is a 4-letter word of $5. Thank you very much for the kind super chat. And she writes, sending love and respect to Jason, Jared, Jefferson, and all listening. Love, Jen. Well, much love in return, Jen. Thank you very much for that kind investment in the cause of white well-being. Every penny will be used for the betterment and salvation of our people, and particularly our young white babies. Joshua Randall, super chatting by way of the familiar alternative. Thank you very much for digging down into the video's description for that, and writing any idea when your second edition of Going Free will be available. Also, do you have any more book plans in mind after that? Joshua, I have thrown it into overdrive. I've become if I was on a mission before, I am a man on fire on a mission now, with Landon being thrown over the railing. And that same day, that was the very next day, finding out about Landon, not being able to sleep, staying awake all night, working on the calls for white well-being, which was the only thing that I could do in response, because I wasn't there at the Mall of America, and I couldn't cause that monster to follow little Landon right over the railing. Instead, I worked all night long on the calls for white well-being. I called out of work, my day job, the next day to continue working on the calls for white well-being. I found out during that day, my dear friend Jared here writing me just my name and a picture of Notre Dame Cathedral on fire. That was such a shock to my system that I have nothing, breathing doesn't matter anymore. Fighting for the cause of white well-being is all that matters now. So I am going to get the second edition of Go Free done as soon as I possibly can, and I'm going to be making that available electronically so that everyone around the world can easily get to the book and that information. There are a lot more MCs, meme curatives, in this next edition. We're going to be talking about a lot of those things on Going Free episodes moving forward. A lot more of the dialectics and lexicon that is going to empower you in your conversations with friends and family and strangers. And I'm going to be getting that out to you as soon as I possibly can. If I can go without sleep, in fact, I did. I went 2 days without sleep. And if necessary, I'll do that every single week to make this happen more quickly. I'm going to be taking the books out of Born Guilty and publishing them individually. So you're going to be able to access Crucible individually. You're going to be able to access Prometheus Rising individually. Those will also be available electronically. And I'm going to make initially Prometheus Rising into an audio book as well, so that it can be read and heard in the cadence that it is intended and written. So that we can get to work on using that text in the way that it's intended to be used, which is to empower you today in our world today. It's allegorical. The lessons are there on many layers, and I want to help all of us get to those lessons that I have infused into that story, taken great pains to do. So we are working on that overdrive. I don't think we have any more super chats, and looks like we are almost out of time. We're almost time to tap out. I'm sure Jefferson knows that phrase very well. He's caused many a man to tap out before the ref said game. So before we close up, I want to ask Jefferson, final thoughts, what you're working on, where people can find you, what you're doing next, and how can they help you, good sir?
Well, first things first, I want to say another interesting factoid about Andrew Jackson, who has long been perhaps my favorite U.S. president. I believe Andrew Jackson, if I'm not mistaken, was the first U.S. president to have an attempt on his life. He was out in public, and a maniac stuck up behind him with a rather crappy old pistol, pulled it out, and the gun went off before it could be pointed at Mr. Jackson. And what did he do in his advanced age? He turned around and beat the man down with his hickory cane. These are men that cannot be replaced. This is not a logo or an icon that we can just strip from our currency and, as you said, replace with Pocahontas or Sacagawea. These are people that we have to revere. And like I said before, as much as Jordan Peterson doesn't like us taking inspiration from this little story about Andrew Jackson, we should. This is the legacy that we bear. This is a great man, and this is someone who I wish was president now, to put it mildly. In terms of where you can find me, you can find me on Twitter. My handle there is at Jefferson Lee TV. I have my own channel, Jefferson Lee. Right now, I do about 2 live streams a week on my channel, usually Sunday night and Wednesday night. And then I do a live stream over on the MPI Radix channel, which is Richard Spencer's channel. And that is where myself and my buddy Josh do. It's called the Broken Arrow podcast, where we break down music, movies, and culture. I typically re-stream that on my channel. And, you're inspiring me, Jason. I would like to start writing again about this type of stuff. I haven't written much in the way of white well-being. I need to find time to start writing. We have to talk, I think, off camera about how to budget time and get that job done. But otherwise, that's all I have, gentlemen. Thank you for having me.
Amen, brother. We'll do it. Jared, good sir, what are you working on? Where can they find you? What's next?
Well, everything for me goes through thegreatorder.com. I believe you should all know that, but of course we might have new people in the audience. So I kind of collate everything that I do in that one place. It's easy. You can navigate videos, these shows. I take you on links to my YouTube channel where all of these are in playlists, easy to navigate. But there's also other things, articles, t-shirts, poems, some information on the Euro invasion that I compiled. Ways to contact me, ways to support, all of that good stuff and more. So if you remember one thing, thegreatorder.com should be pretty easy. I make videos here on YouTube. I do this stream. We do a few other streams as well. A lot of different things in the works, some possible collaborations with others, some new kinds of projects. I don't like to say too much before things are actually about to be premiered. So you'll just have to follow on social media and await with anticipation. But I will highlight, as Jason said in the beginning, we did, speaking of collaboration, something together called Spring Incantation. It's on my channel currently. It's very, very short. It's a totally different kind of video, but we're using the power of the word to set an intention and an energy out there. Also, again, highlight, last month I was on Red Ice. I did a great interview with Henrik. And if you'd like to know a little more, that is probably the most in-depth personal interview that I've done to date. Part 1 is on YouTube, on Red Ice's YouTube, but I encourage people to become Red Ice members to support the amazing work Henrik and Lana and company are doing, but also that's how you can access part 2 of that interview that I did. It's for members only. It's behind the paywall. So anyway, I want to thank Jefferson again for being our guest. It was great to hear your perspectives on Europe. And I think we're all heartened and doubling down, inspired to go on, do new things, reinvest. So that is what we leave you with tonight. Jason, please take us out. We'll talk to you all soon.
Indeed. Thank you, good sir. Thank you both. This has been a fabulous show. Thank you all for being here in the community. It's always great to be with all of the cream of the crop of the white positive spheres who shows up here for white well-being. So I want to thank you all. I want to thank everybody who participated in the chat, asking questions, commenting on the topics that we were discussing. Big thank you to everyone who gave super chats, investing in the cause for white well-being. Thank you so much for those kind investments. I want to also salute some people I saw in the chat. I saw Mary Moon in the chat today. I saw Bobby Fisher as well, a big salute. And King Elvis I saw. Elvis still lives. Thank you very much for being here as well. If you do not already subscribe to these good gentlemen or financially support their work, if you are able, I ask you to please do that. Their contact information is in the description below. Exciting things are happening, folks. We are growing in ways that the anti-whites fear. They know more than anyone does that where their weaknesses are. And they're looking at this doctrine of white well-being, and they are afraid. They're making it plainly obvious. The most powerful in their halls of governance with their great wealth are making it obvious that they are afraid. That is the biggest honor that they could give us. It's the biggest proof of concept that we could receive from anywhere. And I want to say to you all that we will march forward and we will take back what is rightfully ours. I thank you all for being here, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.